have a confession to make. I am terrified of octopuses.
We'll go with vampire. That'll be safer.
I think what I have learned is that I enjoy vampires when they're gay.
Octopus fact time.
Octopus facts!
I mean, that's what we do on this podcast. We just make stuff up with a good argument.
We are the octopus, and the octopus is us.
In the face of horror, we often default to being normal about it.
I mean, how many times have either of us watched a film or something and identified with the monster?
Is it spooky? Is there a castle? Did a woman faint? Ah, it must be gothic.
Metaphors and pretty sentences and a giant monster at the end.
Welcome to The Vampire and the Octopus,
A series by Book Club with Julia
and Victoria.
Two people who quarantined together during the pre-vaccine pandemic and spent that time basically just getting really good at a total of 2 board games. And we'd like to be your book friends.
This is a podcast for the books we just can't shut up about.
This week we're reading The Memory of Animals by Claire Fuller, a speculative novel about a woman participating in a vaccine trial for a global pandemic when the entire world shuts down and she is stuck in a room with her past.
If you care about spoilers, here is your official spoiler warning. We will be discussing the entirety of the book, so if you want to go read it before you listen, here's your point to pause. And whether you've read it or not, you are welcome here. Welcome to the party. We are excited to talk about this one.
Especially because there are some kind of mixed reviews with it. So if you're maybe trying to decide if you want to read it, we've got the 411. Additionally, we did a ton of research for this series. And so with the release of each episode, there's going to be some sort of bonus content, some extra research, a little extra something that didn't make it into the episode that's going to be released on our Buy Me a Coffee. So if you'd like to become a member, some of them are available to just supporters if you make a one-time donation. But if you'd like to become a member, for $3 a month, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv and access all of the extra stuff there. Keep an eye out for that coming out alongside the regular episode releases.
Okay, Julia, so we're book 2 of our Octopus canon. What was your introduction to The Memory of Animals, and why did you bring it as an offering to the club today?
I like the idea that I'm forming an octopus canon. That makes me happy. When I first chose this book for the list, or just to read as an option for the list, I was a bit skeptical because I didn't really see how the octopus was a part of the premise at all. And it hadn't gotten great reviews. It was kind of mixed, right? And most people felt it was either too disjointed or the pacing was weird. But I had been having trouble finding a third book that I liked to complete the set for the series and to provide an alternative kind of take on the octopus and a perspective. And so I gave it a try, and I instantly really enjoyed it. It's definitely not perfect. I think the female characters are a little underdeveloped. I think it's not quite clear enough that there's a mystery that's being that you're supposed to be waiting for, right? So you don't kind of know what kind of book you're in necessarily the whole time. But otherwise, I thought the storylines worked well together. I couldn't articulate why, so it was very helpful to bring Victoria into this discussion. But I felt like the main thing that really gripped me was the way that the author had kind of captured the internal sensory experience of the pandemic super, super well. And so on that level and alone, I felt like I just really needed to talk to you about it because I was like, we've read other pandemic books. I've read other COVID books, and this one's a little bit exaggerated in certain aspects. But boy, did it feel like she knew what it felt like. So yeah, how about you?
I had honestly forgotten everything you told me about the book. You were talking about it when I hadn't read it yet, or even got it from the library. So I was just oh yes, there's many books. My ebook came out from the library. I started reading. I'm I don't remember anything. I didn't remember the mixed reviews or the pandemic setting. I was oh right, this is not strictly a book about animals. Also about, well, another animal, the human.
Uh-huh.
So I came in with no expectations and thoroughly enjoyed it. Like, I was recommending it to a friend of mine that I think would really like it. I was not even done with the book when I was starting to recommend it to people. I think it is telling an interesting story. It's capturing emotions that are very relatable as we have survived lockdowns together, and like plays with some interesting themes. And I honestly, while I didn't entirely know what the Octopus letters were doing at first, we'll get into why I think it works later on, but part of it was it's a super heavy topic to dive into and remind readers of a very difficult thing a lot of us have gone through. I don't know why I'm picturing someone listening to this in like 15 years, and maybe they were too young to remember, but like, yeah. I think Fuller nailed the experience of isolation and anxiety and boredom while you're living like basically on top of other people. Like, it's an interesting experience to feel extremely lonely and isolated when you're sitting next to someone in this experience. And so I'm glad you brought it to the book club coven for our mutual discussion.
You are very welcome.
And I'm now, I feel like a Claire Fuller advocate. I feel the need. I read some of these reviews and I was like, y'all,
yeah,
like, it is a good book. I have read some terrible books.
Yeah.
I also took big issue with someone who criticized the book and literally got the characters wrong. And I was like, okay, yes, I have done a podcast for 5 years. I have messed up character names. I have maybe not reviewed and critiqued everything with the most scrutiny. If you're going to go and publish a book review saying why you don't like a book, you should maybe at least get some names right. Like, I confused two of the characters who are very, very different characters. And I'm also wondering, in the same way that we will, as a book community, all of us will do the thing where I've heard good things about this book, I therefore will be like ready to read good things about the book. You know, like, I'm ready to promote the image that I've already accepted about this book that I haven't read yet. I also wonder if there's a reluctance to give a middling review or a slightly positive review on a book that has been criticized by others, where it isn't yet like, I don't know, I'm taking it back, because there's a lot of people who like to go against the grain and like love a thing that everyone says is only mid.
But I think that's what some critics feel like they're doing when they give a negative review. They feel like they're going against the grain. Because you remember, they've been given a package, a promotional package of all the things to love and all the blurbs about this book and how great it is. And they're like, yeah.
Yeah, like the reviewer at the Telegraph literally gave it 1 star.
Insane.
Yeah, I'm like, I can list 25 1-star books.
Yeah.
They wouldn't come close to the emotional and like world building work that Claire Fuller's doing. Like, you can miss the mark on a couple things and still be like a solid like 3-star book, 4-star book.
Yeah. Like a solid 3.5, which I think is what it has on like Goodreads, like 3.6 or something. I think that's perfect.
Yeah. Believe the masses.
Yes! I do wonder, though, if this is the kind of book, like, I don't know if this book will age well.
Yeah.
Or if it will be maybe used by people to try and figure out, you know, if there will be a college class someday that's called, like, pandemic literature, and people will read this book to, like, study the psyche of the era, you know what I mean? Or something like that. Like, I don't know how translatable these experiences are outside of the people who, and I guess that's what a book is supposed to do. You know, you're supposed to empathize with things you haven't personally experienced before. But, like, I thought, like you were saying, the way that these storylines work together made total sense to me. I could not articulate why, but it just made total sense to me. I was like, yeah, this is what it feels like. This is what it was like. I'm being transported back to 2020. That sort of disjointed experience of being in one place but constantly thinking about your past and like journaling a lot and like being bored and anxious and tense and like all these things at the same time, and like you were saying, lonely but on top of people. Like, it's so particular. And the pacing, some people complain about the pacing, and I'm like, yeah, that's what it was like. Like, It was
Let me tell you, pacing of a lockdown is not, your typical action-packed novel pacing.
Yeah.
It is the pacing of, oh my god, everything's happening at once, and then nothing is happening. That's a lockdown
forever.
Pace.
Probably.
The students in 100 years who are analyzing the psyche of COVID novels will be writing their papers, helping you out now if you're listening to this in 100 years. They can write their papers about how the pacing of novels reflects lockdown experience and what that does to the reading experience. I mean, it's an undergrad kind of paper. You're not writing a dissertation on that kind of stuff. I mean, I pulled that out of my ass right now. So, that's undergrad level.
You're going to survive your writing 101 class, thanks to us. You're so welcome. Okay, so we have a second Claire, 2 Claires in a row, right? Tell us about this Claire number 2, this author.
Yes. Claire Fuller is a novelist and short fiction writer. She lives near Winchester, England. She has a cat named Alan, which is, I thought, a fun fact, and I didn't know where to put it. Okay. She was born and raised in Oxfordshire and studied sculpture at uni, and her art was mainly working in stone and wood. Like many an artist, she then went and began a career in marketing, which she did for a very long time, and led a marketing agency, and at the age of 40, she started writing fiction. She went on to, in her 40s, get a master's in creative and critical writing from the University of Winchester. Winchester? How do the Brits say it?
Well, I can't tell if you've spelled this wrong or if...
I think I spelled it wrong.
Yeah, Winchester.
Okay.
You forgot the H.
Winchester. She went on to get a master's in creative and critical writing from the University of Winchester and published her debut novel in 2015 entitled Our Endless Numbered Days, which won awards and accolades, which you can read about on the internet. She has since published 4 additional novels to much acclaim, many of which featured the themes of isolation, which we see in this book we're discussing today, The Memory of Animals, which came out in 2023. As we noted, it didn't get the largest hurrah from critics, but it does seem to be fairly, read and people are interested in it, and since Claire Fuller's works previously had done so well, it garnered a lot of attention. So I think this is a moment for us to dive in and talk about a book we liked that maybe was underrated, I would say underrated, by the critics.
Yeah. So, there are 3 different storylines. So, we first meet our main character, Neffy, when she's arriving at a medical facility to participate in a vaccine trial during a pandemic. Sound familiar? Because she owes her former job a lot of money. We don't know why at this point. And she loses contact with her boyfriend, Justin, when his plane lands in Sweden? Denmark?
Somewhere over there.
One of those. I am so sorry. I know those 2 countries have historically not liked each other. I think it's Sweden. Their plane has landed and there are armed guards not letting them get off the plane because of fear of the pandemic spread. So it's really just her in a locked white room, trying not to think about her past, being taken care of by a nurse. She's given the vaccine and then the virus in a pretty quick succession. And then the story sort of exists in multiple places at once as she's experiencing severe symptoms and is not fully conscious. And we have one of the passages that we're going to read there because a lot of her subconscious is just octopuses. So, when she wakes up, the facility is kind of in disarray and is mostly empty. Only 4 people seem to be left besides her. So these are our characters. So there's Rachel. She's the youngest. She's obsessed with Instagram. That's her only character trait, and it's a little frustrating. Her dad is in prison. So all 4 of these characters, don't have anywhere else to go. They don't have any family to go to, and that's why they're still here. Okay. Leon works in tech. His mom recently died pre-pandemic. He grew up in Elephant and Castle in London, which is a poor neighborhood in South London. Yahiko, he's gay, as well as he sort of hoards everything. So he's collected all the stuff left behind by everyone else in the building, and he's keeping track of it in his room like a shopkeeper. I didn't love that the only Asian character was the kind of miserly one. That felt a little weird. I don't know. And then Piper, she's older, unclear how old. I put her in mid to late 30s. Extremely tense and anxious. She's sort of the one managing the food portions and counting the days and making plans and very, very tense, kind of unlikable person. However, it seems Neffy is the only one to have been given the disease and the vaccine because there was an interruption and almost everyone went home. Or were they all given the vaccine and only she got the disease? Is that what it is?
So, of the 5 people, she's the only one who received the vaccine and the virus. The others, for various reasons, opted out, or the trial was shutting down before they got a chance to get it.
So almost everyone in the building decided to go home to be with their families before the world ended because things were getting so bad. And some of the symptoms are like brain swelling, your eyes get really big and your whole body kind of swells up, and people are just kind of wandering through the streets, and it was just everything kind of shut down. It was really bad. So then we enter into a slower segment of the book where they're just kind of circling around each other, sussing each other out, trying not to go crazy, being afraid of the outside world, rationing food. We learn a little about their backstories. And Leon asks Neffy if she wants to try this new tech that his company was testing, a bit unsuccessfully, before the pandemic that allows you to, like, viscerally revisit memories. So this starts the second storyline, in which Neffy spends a lot of time trying to relive the past. So her childhood visiting her father and stepmother at their struggling bed and breakfast in Greece, meeting her boyfriend, who's also her stepbrother. A weirder choice to make, for sure. Is like the son of someone her mom married when they were, like, adults. So they're not. It's weird, but not that weird. I don't know. And instantly falling in love. Her father needing a kidney transplant, which she provides. And then that doesn't stick.
No, she only had one kidney.
That's
They go
right.
to do the ultrasound to like check on her kidney health, and she only has one. So she can't give up one.
That's why she can't do it. That's
Yeah.
right. So then as an alternative, they offer to do an experimental procedure in which a kidney is, like, grown inside of her, like a child. And then they cut it out and give it to him. But he dies before she can decide whether or not to do it. So all throughout these, as we're getting these 2 main plots kind of interspersed, cutting back and forth. At the end of each major section, there's a third storyline in which Neffy in present day is writing letters, kind of journaling in a notebook to H, who we soon learn is an octopus she worked with at the job. I think she started it right after her dad died. So throughout these letters, we get some of her internal monologue on what's happening in the present. It's the biggest insight we have into her feelings, honestly, but also the story of how guilty she felt about assisting in experiments on the octopus, until she finally decided to steal him away and release him into the sea, which is why she owes them so much money. So the sort of pressure point towards the end of the novel is the group starts running out of food, and so they convince Neffy to venture outside to forage, because she's the only one who seems to be immune, right? So while she's gathering supplies, she gets a vantage point from the outside of the 2 bedrooms next door to her. So within the facility, there's, like, you know, a line of bedrooms, and she's able to see from the outside through the windows of the rooms next to hers. And she realizes that there are dead bodies in there. So there were other people who received the vaccine and the virus who didn't make it. And the crew, the 4 people that she's with, left them in there to die. That they actually did show signs of life for a bit. Not as long as Neffy, but a little bit. And they refused to help them. And so they have been hiding the fact that there's, like, dead people in this building. She's furious, but she realizes she also has no choice but to, like, work with these people because there are literally no other people in the world, maybe. So they gather the supplies, they steal an ambulance that's crashed outside, and go to her probably dead boyfriend's house in the countryside. / her mom's and stepfather's. It's like their house. I don't know. She uses Leon's sperm to impregnate herself, turkey baster style, so she can further the human race and not be so alone. Especially because soon all of the crew start to die from eating infected animals, so we can't even have one nice thing. At the very end, it's just her and her daughter, and she sees sort of smoke rising from a neighboring home, and so she decides to go investigate. And we get a little hint that, like, her daughter lives a long life. That's most of it. There's a lot of other details.
I was like, that's a pretty long summary, and there's still, like, several things.
But I think that's everything we need for our discussion.
Okay, so how do we think about the octopus in this novel?
We're looking specifically at the octopus in captivity. Obviously, there's humans in captivity, but also the octopus is kind of our central pivot point in all the different narratives and storylines. And so we sort of use the octopus as a comparison point for quarantine and just kind of humans under medical duress, both in the real world as the COVID-19 pandemic rolled out and all these octopus stories kind of blew up, right? So we're looking at the actual context in which this book evolved, but also within the context of the novel itself, like how the main character uses the memory of her relationship to an octopus to sort of cope with her situation. So we have like a meta level and then like an internal level. So we're going to start with the meta just as kind of a way in of like why we connected with this book and what our experiences of some of these themes, so you can see where we're coming from, before getting into how the octopus kind of operates in the book specifically. So let's talk about Julie and Victoria in captivity, right? What was your experience, specifically the period where we read The Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery, and where that was sort of introduced thematically into our year? And this specifically was May, June 2020, right? Shit was hitting the fan.
Yeah. Let's go back in time. Early May 2020, I had finally decided it was going to be worth the risk for me to travel to Ohio to see my family, which we had a lot more time to contemplate than our characters in this novel did. But it was a lot of back and forth of like, and I remember talking with my therapist and like crying on the phone to my mom and like talking to you and our other roommate at the time, like, this is such an unknown situation. I don't know how much longer we're going to be locked down. We thought it was going to be a couple weeks, but now it's looking longer. I'm unemployed and fairly sad. My brother had to come home from college and he was going through the sads as well. And so I was like, maybe it would be worth the risk to travel for the benefit of that dedicated time with family. My parents lived in a more rural area where we had a lot of space compared to what we had in Chicago. So it was a lot of weighing the pros and cons of like, do I leave or do I stay? So like I relate to Neffy on that level. Obviously it wasn't as dramatic as if I step outside these doors, I might die. But it was a sense of negotiating those risks where we were coming a little bit out of, we can do absolutely nothing but sit here, and playing with the idea of this might be a long time. How do we care for ourselves for the long haul?
Yes.
Is seeing my family for a week or two, I think I was there for like 2 weeks, going to be better for my mental health in the long run than continuing to stay put? I also was able to drive. That was a huge factor. Like I know you couldn't really drive unless you drove for a very long time to see your family. And so it also felt like I have this opportunity and this privilege and I would like to take that opportunity. So, and it was really good to be with my family. And so a lot of memories of May of 2020 was that emotional decision making, but also that reading back to my journal, which I don't recommend, but it was fine. I also was reminded that a lot of my concern with going home was that it felt like, even though we were in the midst of a global pandemic, I made everything about myself, right? So I'm like, I lost my job. You know, not like, oh, a pandemic meant a lot of people lost our jobs. I was like, I didn't think it would be me that lost my job. And going home, not having a job, not having like anything really, what felt like nothing really going for me. It felt like this moment of failure. And my parents like, you're not moving home unless you want to, you can. But like, you're not moving home. You're just coming home to visit. It's okay. And so it was navigating that kind of ego issue as well of feeling like I had stumbled and failed. And looking back, I have so much empathy for that version of me. Like, I didn't know that in July I'd get a little part-time job that would give me a sense of routine. I'd like find a really cool opportunity to help parents get access to resources to support them and their families during the pandemic. And that would turn into a really cool job that would turn into a freelancing career. And like, so many new things were going to unfold in just a couple months. But in that moment in May, it felt like, well, what do I even have? You know, that's a little bit of what was going on around the time that I read this. I think I actually read it a little bit later than you did because you read the book first. But I similarly remember talking with you at the same time you were reading Soul of an Octopus of like, I don't even know if I can read right now.
Yeah.
So I think May, June was when I got into some more lighthearted books. I remember reading some comedy and reading some like graphic novels, like things that felt a little bit easier.
I feel like I just associate it with more primal decisions. You know, life or death decisions, in-group, out-group decisions, eating, sleeping. I don't know. I feel like you were saying, this was sort of a transition point between the immediate tension and panic of March and April to transitioning into like, oh, I think we're going to be here a while. I think we're going to have to wait until there's a vaccine to even think about doing anything around people again. And there was that podcast, Staying In with Emily and Kumail, that we were both listening to religiously, where they like had a lot of experience quarantining because of her medical condition. And so like they were kind of talking you through like, okay, here, if you're in it for the long haul, here's some things you can do. And yeah, that sort of reality was sitting in, is like, how do we make a life like this? And just the cognitive load of the feeling like the world was ending and you had to like figure out what to cook for dinner. Like, what? Why? So like, what? Reading? Like, what? It just felt like I can't put more shit in my head right now. And so, yeah, I think spending some time with some octopuses was a bit of a reprieve, a bit of getting back into reading again. A bit of like, how do I enjoy things again in the midst of all this? Should I be enjoying things? I don't know. In this book, we see, this book really covers that sort of turning point. Like the sort of climactic point of the novel is the transitioning from the immediate panic of everything shutting down, transitioning into long haul, how do we live like this? I feel like that is kind of the narrative arc of the novel. And so I think I also had a lot of survivor's guilt during this period of privilege, of like, we can afford to ask these questions of like, what should we be doing? Can we go anywhere? I felt like we had a lot of stability and space and the privilege of isolation. And it sucked so bad, but it was still better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, I'm living through this horrible thing, and also I should feel grateful because it could be so much worse. So what are some of, if you could just pick out a couple like sense memories during quarantine? Because this book is so focused on, like in the midst of the chaos, just focusing in on experiencing the senses. Like, is there anything that kind of sticks out from that period?
Yeah, so I really got into these like dance workout videos.
Our poor downstairs neighbor.
I wonder some days if that's why they moved out. I'm just stomping around every day for like 2 or plus hours. And so it brings back a feeling of feeling clumsy and sweaty. And like, I remember a lot of sunshine thinking back to this time, even though like May, June in Chicago isn't the sunniest time. But I think at that feeling of walking around the neighborhood and watching all the leaves come out green and like, I mean, they started flowering in April, but really taken off in May and June. And you get that, the cicadas come and you're starting to get that humidity. And like, it felt like a waking up, but paradoxed with this, I'm wearing a mask, I'm staying distant, I don't even think in June yet we were having friends in the backyard. Like we weren't at that stage of the pandemic. Like it was still, the season was opening up, but that internal feeling that we weren't. But it did feel like a new breath to have the outside as a place that was desirable to be in. I think of just like sitting in our grassy backyard of all the time. It's the only time in my adult life that I've had a backyard, and I'm so glad it was for those 2 years. Which is funny that the senses that come back are like movement and sunshine and grass, when like, as we all just heard, the emotions were not so sunny.
I feel like those are the things you remember because they stick out. Because so much of the day-to-day just kind of blurs together into nothing. Just like, was I in my body at all? Who knows? I spent that entire summer getting migraines and I developed TMJ during that year. Yeah, that summer it was like a combination of like trying new medications and like stress and not moving my body enough and just, you know, a bunch of factors, all screens all on top of each other. And so like I remember pain and like kind of fogginess. I remember I would go lie in the grass and stare up at a tree against the sky and listen to a song on repeat and just like put myself in a little sensory bubble. So I have a very vivid picture of like what the trees looked like against the sky and like feeling the grass on my back. Those were some of the few times when I was like kind of embodied, you know? I remember being very hot and like stressed playing board games with like there's a little bit of alcohol, a little bit of like this game is so hard and I'm losing again. And then just like sitting on a lot of various surfaces. I feel like that's what I remember. Because the whole time, the whole like year and a half, all just feels like kind of one long day. And it's punctuated by these little moments of sensation. So if we're reading a book about like the weirdness of quarantine during a pandemic and it like she's writing letters to an octopus. She's reliving her past. Like, why an octopus, right? These sort of sense memories we've talked about, this sort of experience we've talked about. What does an octopus bring to that?
Yeah, because it's like an octopus. Each of these storylines have a mind of their own, right? Like the neurology of this novel is spread out in these different storylines, but it's all one thing. It is all Neffy's experience. So I think what the octopus brings is that there's the present day going through this drug trial, but like Neffy uses that as a time to reflect. And we get that internal monologue only because we get like a journal. And for her, it's writing as a sense of guilt. And so she's in this trial because she feels guilty and owes money. And she's writing about her guilt. And she goes back in time to then connect to the story and kind of like parse out if she's still guilty. It like she's wanting to go spend time with her dad, and I think the themes tie all these together because we're dealing with this idea of being in an experiment, right? So she's literally in a drug trial experiment. We get the longer storyline of her father that ends with the possibility of a drug trial experiment, and we have her apologizing to this octopus that she was the experimenter. She was experimenting on the octopus. She was a part of that. And so the octopus is really like connected, and I think it works because it breaks up these like emotional beats and it brings us into different versions of Neffy, almost like we go into the different arms of the octopus, but we're all like in one novel. And you could take out one of those pieces, and I think it's a weaker novel. There's critics who say that it doesn't need the octopus at all. But I think what we lose then is that internal monologue of what's going on, how she is emotionally dealing with the experience.
Yeah, because anytime she wants to kind of dissociate from the situation, she'll start referencing octopus facts. She treats the octopus in the past and the present kind of like an extension of herself and her father in a way. And also, just like on a functional storytelling level, the octopus and her actions are a response to her father dying. And then her releasing the octopus as a response to her father dying is the reason that she has to join the drug trial, right? So it's this sort of fulcrum point connecting her past and her present. If she didn't owe money, I don't think she would have joined this necessarily. And then also it is kind of a way for her to extend her thoughts and feelings into another creature. Which, like you said, it is very multiple and just like Neffy is, right? She's allowed to kind of be... When she's revisiting, she's herself and she's also not herself. She's like two people in this body. It works very well. And if you look at it as this kind of pivot point, we start to see two main themes that we're going to explore. There's other similarities, but two main themes. Kind of like you pointed out, the experimentation piece and isolation, which kind of go hand in hand. And then secondly, they all involve the dealing with memory as someone who has survived. So there's a ton of survivor's guilt. At a certain point, it seems like she's the last person on Earth, right? How do you deal with that? So we're going to explore these two themes. How the octopus is written about gives us some insight into what the author is trying to say about them.
So this one, as we said, it really feels like a COVID book, even though the pandemic of the book is different than COVID. But it's really dealing with that, like, being trapped inside. And we don't get a lot of the, like, apocalyptic aftermath. Like, once communications shut down, there's no news, there's no television, there's no phone service. Like, once it's all shut down, we're really just left with our characters in isolation. You know, there's other novels that deal with, like, the fallout globally. If you think of, like, World War Z or, like, How High We Go in the Dark, where we're investigating, like, how does the world respond? How do different cultures respond? Different families respond? This one is, like, yes, the globe has been affected, but our characters have not figured out what has happened, and we've no longer are fixated on figuring out investigatively what happened elsewhere. We're focused on survival. It gets real into the day-to-day. Like, it deals with, there's only so many frozen meals left. How do we ration these? Who's in charge? How do we, like, have these, like, interpersonal relationships with people we didn't expect to be locked down with this long? And it makes me think a lot about, like, our pandemic experience. And reading back to my journals, like, I wrote a lot about, like, the first few weeks of, like, this is specifically what's happening. I felt like the need to kind of record, not that, like, no one else could find what happened in 2020 besides my journals, but, like, for me to just have that physical written down of, like, today the restaurant's closed. I'm going to call my friend who works in the restaurant industry and see if she's okay. Like, this got canceled. I also was reminded reading my journal today that apparently I was planning on going vacation with my boyfriend. I don't remember where we were planning to go, but I was just like, oh, our vacation was canceled. Eventually, you know, I start writing about the day-to-day, like how I'm coping, what needs to get done. I'm writing my grocery list. I'm writing out my notes of what I want to do that day. And that's where we get to in this novel. It's really fixated on the day-to-day experience, the little pieces of getting through that time, and those heavy decisions. Neffy's big decision of, does she go out? She thinks she's immune because she's had the virus and the vaccine helped protect her against it. She survived, but it's really unknown. But she is more likely to be immune than anyone else. So should it be her? And then in the octopus line, we get a real struggle with experimentation. You know, Neffy feels super guilty for assisting with the experiments. They're experimenting on, like, octopus limb regeneration. So they're literally, like, performing surgery to take off the limbs, study the limbs, watch as the octopus grows them back. And while Neffy's told, like, the octopus isn't in pain, she can't help but feel like that's a very callous way to deal with another creature. It doesn't sit right with her. And since she knows the octopus, she's an assistant, she, like, feeds it. They seem to have quite the emotional relationship too. You know, like, Neffy, like, cries into the tank and the octopus, like, comes up into her arms. But she's kind of told, like, you're not supposed to have an emotional relationship. You're not supposed to project your human expectations on this other creature that we're studying. And I find it interesting to put in comparison where Neffy is more and more feeling like she's interested in doing the kidney thing, but she's not sure. But then her dad dies, so she doesn't even get to, like, make up her mind about that. Mm-hmm. And then she decides to do this trial, even though her family's saying, like, you don't have to do this. Like, you don't need to do it. And I wonder if it's almost like this part of the survivor's guilt is, like, I have to go be experimented on. Mm. Like, I need to turn the tables in some way. And it is different, right? Like, the octopus is not a consenting being. At least we can't receive their consent for experimentation like this, where she in some way is. But what do you see as those parallels, or what's different there? What's the same or what's different?
So the way she talks about working on the octopus, she seems to hate the kind of emotional detachment. This is how she describes it. She says, it was my job to collect the parts of the severed octopus arms, tag each one to identify which octopus it had come from, and fix the part in formaldehyde before it would become embedded in paraffin wax and serially sectioned. Observe, record. She keeps repeating this phrase, observe, record, observe, record. It seems to really bother her how detached everyone was, supposedly for a greater purpose. Yeah, she seems to be unclear whether she sees the octopus as herself writing from, because she's writing these in quarantine, having been experimented on, right? So she's using it to experience her feelings from the present, but also she's writing about how she, at the time, used the octopus to deal with her feelings about her father. I do agree. I think she felt like she owed the world her body in some way, that she didn't deserve to be happy without putting herself through this. But at the same time, it's very upsetting to her that anyone else would have to go through it. This feels like a classic Julia thing. I don't know. We both do this, where it's like, no one else is allowed to suffer, but like, obviously I have to, because, or no one else should have to experience this horrible thing, but like, it's fine if I do, because like, I deserve, whatever. There's this kind of disjointed guilt and punishment that she's kind of putting on herself. Like, she's trying to make up her mind about what the right thing to do is, like, is this sort of detached experimentation ultimately a good thing? It ends up being kind of necessary for, like, humankind, but also by the end of the book, it doesn't even really matter, because everything else has, like, the entire thing gets destroyed, and the world is completely different. It's a fundamentally different place anyway. But it gives her daughter a place to live. And immunity. She also experiences a lot of discomfort with her father being in all of these cold, white rooms, just like the ones Neffy finds herself in the beginning of the novel. And she has a lot of trouble seeing him there. It's like this kind of detached, cold place where he doesn't really belong. What's interesting is, like, she's dealing with all this guilt. And then we find out that her father didn't want her to do it. He was actively fighting and putting his body in physical danger and stress in order to make sure that she didn't do this to herself. He is not interested in her being experimented on for his sake. He wants both of them to be free. And so I feel like you can kind of read his death, which happens kind of off screen, as like his sort of last act of freedom, last act of resistance on behalf of his daughter. I wonder if the experiment, if setting the octopus free is like a way of telling herself that whether or not working through whether or not she was worth it, right? Whether it was worth him giving up his life for hers, that kind of thing. And then also in the present, deciding what she should do with that life that he's given her. And in the end, she gives the octopus freedom. She tries to give the octopus life. And she tries to do that for herself as well.
Yeah, there's a amount of, like, Neffy has this feeling that she has to do all these things, that she has to, like, carry these burdens, that she has to be the one to act. That is highly relatable and very frustrating. Yeah. Because from the outside looking in, you're like, Neffy, your dad doesn't even want you to do that. Like, you don't have to do that. And also, like, I think the unspoken question is, like, what does saving even look like for all three of these storylines, right? So it's, for Neffy's dad, he's very ill. He's tried a lot of different things. He's uncomfortable with the money that his mother-in-law has thrown at the situation. He is uncomfortable with his daughter coming in to do this trial and giving up potentially her fertility, because they don't know how it's going to impact her uterus to grow this kidney. Similar to the octopus, like, I don't remember exactly what kind of octopus this is, but octopuses don't live super long. We don't really have insight, and Neffy doesn't seem to have insight either, of will this octopus be okay in the ocean after it's been in captivity for this long? And is she saving her father? Is she saving the octopus to appease her own mental anguish about the situation? This feeling of, like, I just have to do something. Whereas, like, is it really what others need from you, Neffy? Is that really what needs to be done? And in that way, we also get this sense of, like, a bit of positivity, I guess, towards the end, that she went in with this mentality of, like, I need to pay off this debt. I need to do these things. And she could have just been home with her family in the end. But actually what saved her was going for the trial. But in the end, she didn't really save anyone else. She only saved herself. Because everyone else dies. She does live to have a daughter, though, which is, like, hope for humanity in general. But I think, I don't know if that's really dark or really hopeful, of, like, in the end, all she could do is save herself, and even that she did kind of unwittingly.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how the Octopus can be both of them. These 3 storylines are developing all at the same time, right? So we learn about her releasing the Octopus at the same time that we learn about her father dying before she can save him, and also her making the decision of whether or not to leave the building. And so for all of these 3, we have, we have the Octopus being her father, who she failed to save and is now trying as a to sort of surrogate her father in for the Octopus and save the Octopus. But also we have the Octopus's Neffy, where it's like, will Neffy, who's been in captivity, survive outside? We don't know, but it feels worth it to try. It's crazy how it kind of works on both of those levels. Like you said, she's a very difficult character at times. She can be very frustrating. Like, she can be very relatable, but very frustrating. And I feel like the Octopus it's kind of her childlike heart. It's like the essence of herself. It's like the redeemable qualities of herself. She projects all of them onto an octopus. Her letters to the Octopus are really the only reason we know how she feels about anything. And it's really interesting to see how the author plays with it. I'm really obsessed with how the author wrote her being sick. We get to sort of exist in, like, multiple physical places and storylines at the same time, where, like, we're in her memories, we're in the present day. Like, we can still track what's happening to her in the present of, like, oh, we can understand she's sick and she's kind of delirious and dehydrated and this is what's happening. But also these are all the subconscious things that she's thinking about. And that's where we get all of these themes that get sort of introduced in this transformational moment before we track them and they split off again into 3, which is, again, very Octopus-like. This is when Neffy is very, very sick and the nurse comes to give her some water. Like, the last time the nurse comes to help her before she goes back home to her family. Okay. The Octopus drags me back, hauls me up onto the bed. Each sucker can lift 5 pounds. Or is it 30? She lays an arm across my forehead, clammy, damp, cooling. She shouldn't be here, in bed with me. She can only survive for 20 minutes out of water, 30 at most. And besides, my raft is only big enough for 1. I push at her mantle and she flashes blue, 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 the light moving across her skin and her eyes blinking, a black dash in an opalescent marble, knowing, remembering. Drink, she says. Take these, she says. I open my mouth, swallow. I've never heard you talk before, I say. Tell me what you see. But she slinks off the side of the raft, lowers herself into the inky waters below the bed, and is gone. So, like, we can track, oh, the nurse is coming in, making her take pills, and she's, like, you know, trying to take care of her, trying to help her survive, but also this is the octopus that Neffy failed to save. She wants to hear this octopus speak to her, and she has this kind of emotional connection with it. The way that she cares more for the octopus, like, oh, the octopus shouldn't be here. You're gonna die if you stay and take care of me. You shouldn't be here. But, like, Neffy put herself in this situation. And this delusional narration goes on for, like, a whole couple chapters. But you can see how everything gets woven together in her mind in this moment. And I feel like this is the part of her being sick is part of what makes the book work, because it's like where we see how all of these things are threaded together in this very chaotic section. And it's almost like we come out of it into, like, the Wizard of Oz. This is like the tornado. Everything gets smoothied up together and then we emerge in Munchkin Land. So we've already been talking about this a fair amount. How she uses sort of the writing of the letters to the octopus as a way to kind of process her feelings about the past, the present, all the storylines. And the main thing she feels is this sort of survivor's guilt.
The times that we get back in her memory, so one of the characters brings this, like, tool that you can go, like, viscerally remember things. And it works on some people and doesn't on others, and they don't really know why. It also becomes addictive. We see Neffy kind of struggling with, it's happier to go back to the past, even when the stories are difficult, but there's this hope that she's going to see her boyfriend, Justin. But she keeps going back to her childhood, and we're moving actually kind of chronologically through a lot of her childhood when she travels back to Greece to visit her father, which she also enjoys. She likes seeing her dad, but she's like trying to go back again and again, kind of for that fix to like see Justin, and instead is going back to see her dad, and actually lands in some of these painful and uncomfortable memories of, you know, the bed and breakfast not doing well and her dad getting sick, and like she doesn't necessarily want to see that because it brings up those feelings of guilt. And actually she does go back to see Justin, and she gets to have these beautiful moments and memories. But one thing that is really difficult for her is, we learn as the reader, we realize she has not forgiven herself for Justin flew in to see her and they were having sex when her dad died. She was in this moment of bodily pleasure. She was reunited with someone she loved. And so she gets to relive that memory, even though she knows what's coming, of like, oh, this was like that last moment before I realized, you know, my dad was gone. I didn't have a decision to make anymore about the kidney experiment. And so I think threaded through a lot of this is that sense of survivor's guilt that she's carried with her, and that kind of propelled her storyline forward. Though there are parts of her memories that I'm like, that's a beautiful moment, but like, why? Like, we get this whole other thing about like this guy she tries to hook up with, but then they become friends, and I don't really know his piece in all of that. There's a bit of her childhood where her dad brings home a tiger cub, and she like relives that memory of like cuddling with a tiger cub, and then eventually the tiger's taken away. And then I guess it kind of connects in on this like piece of animal cruelty. Like, she thinks the tiger cub gets to go live this life somewhere, but it's likely the tiger was like killed. So I guess thematically it kind of ties in. But I do feel like the memories, while they're really beautiful and enjoyable to read, that does feel a little weak as far as the tie-ins go. I could have been a little more succinct, but they were beautiful to read and like interesting to like flush out her childhood experiences.
Yeah, I feel like some of those memories were like to paint her father as a complicated person who maybe was kind of selfish. He was kind of selfish with his wife. He was selfish with creatures. He, you know, had kind of an inflated ego. But he chose at the end to make sure that his daughter didn't suffer on his behalf. It makes their relationship more complicated and her decisions more complicated. I think one of the strongest parts of the book is what you pointed out, where she's experiencing a sense of pleasure while he's dying. And so, like, she feels guilty for having positive sensory experiences, like, period. And you get a very strong tie between her guilt and her embodiment, in a way. But actually, I think part of what the author is trying to do is say that embodiment is part of the way out, part of how she can heal and process her memories, and the only way out is through. We get this beautiful sequence journaling to the octopus, where she finally is able to articulate her grief about her father's death from the present. And so this is where all the storylines tie together. It's where she decides to free the octopus and actually experience her feelings. She writes, "So I had to go back to work immediately. I went straight to your tank. You formed your eyes into craggy peaks and then flashed your colors through deep red to mottled orange to white, a Turkish carpet lifting and rolling as it flapped. Were you cross with me for being gone so long? Baba's dead, I think I said, hanging over the tank. I didn't save him. I put my head on my hands, grasping to the top of the glass and letting my tears drop into the water. I've read since that emotional tears, psychic tears, have a different chemical composition to tears created to lubricate. Could you taste that? Did you know? Because you came to me then, your pupils dilated, and you touched my cheek with the tip of an arm, and then you climbed out of the tank, and I held you while I cried." Beautiful. The octopus is such like a visceral, sensory, embodied thing that she is embracing in this moment of admitting her feelings, feeling them fully, and that's when she decides to save the octopus. And getting this moment towards the end of the novel, around when she's deciding to leave her own captivity and to try and live again right? She suffered so much loss. She knows everybody out there's dead, and she has to try and continue to live again. Time and again, we get an emphasis on the senses as a way of coping with grief and carrying forward.
Yeah, it's something we didn't talk about a whole lot. I mean, we really kind of glossed over the relationship that Neffy negotiates with the other people. Like, that's a lot of the book. And there's this, like, sense of mystery that I think both of us argue isn't fully there, so you're not totally bought in that there's a mystery to be unveiled. But what you do find out is, as Neffy starts to get her senses back, one of the hints that something might be going on is everyone seems very preoccupied with, like, how she's recovering from the virus, because one of the things it took from her was her sense of smell and taste. Like, her senses start to come back around the time that she's beginning to fortify herself to, like, okay, I'm going to go outside and venture outside. But it also creates, like, that danger, because one thing that the group has done before she's coming out of the room after the virus and vaccine is break the AC, is what she's told. Something happens when broke the AC, it's only on full blast. So everyone, this whole book is, like, even though it's not that cold outside, like, covered in layers of clothes because the AC's blasting. But because she's regaining her sense of smell, they're concerned that she's going to smell the dead bodies and figure out what they did. So it's interesting in a book that's so much about the senses and, like, the way that it becomes so vivid when she goes into these rememberings. There's also this kind of, this other layer of how all the senses were removed in the trial, and they're slowly given back to her. And that kind of leads her out into the world.
The regaining of her senses, I feel like, is symbolic for so many different parts of the story, where, like, it's a regaining of her embodiment, it's a regaining of her embracing of reality in the present, of her awareness, right? And some of the things she has to be aware of are not very pretty. There are dead people. And for a while, she's just commenting on, like, is the trash chute broken or something? And everyone gives her these, like, weird looks. And we don't realize there's anything wrong. But the whole time, she's smelling dead people. I really enjoyed in the revisits how that double consciousness of, like, her present day self and her past self, where, like, her past self kind of takes everything for granted, and her present day self is like, I'm the only one who really appreciates how good this tastes, or how great this smells, or how wonderful this feels on my skin, right? She's, like, getting a chance to realize how wealthy she is in kind of sensory experience, and, like, dive back into herself in that way. In the mishmash of all this emotional chaos, goop, claustrophobia, it seems like the way out is to sink back into her body and try to get back to basics, in a way, in her relationship with herself and her relationship with other people. I mean, she continues to lose people over and over and over again, and yet she still continues to reach out. She goes back to these moments of connection with people, and some of them worked and some of them didn't, and most of them are painful. And yet, by the end of the novel, she's like, I think it's worth it to do this again.
Yeah, to go possibly investigate the house over the hill that has smoke. I think with the ending of the book, I definitely felt like I could use a little bit more. We move so quickly through kind of how things wrap up, but it would either be a much longer book, I think, or kind of take away from some of the other elements. Sometimes when I'm, like, just wrapping up a book, it's often late at night and then I'm going to sleep, and so I'm, like, laying there thinking about the ending, and I just rewrote it where, like, all her friends don't die.
Yeah.
But poignantly, I think her and her daughter being the last ones, and pushing forward anyways, is thematic.
Yeah, I remember that was one of the things when we were, like, talking through pros and cons of the book. You were like, why did they all have to die?
Yeah. They're just getting to, like, get along, being the little, like, commune, and
they finally figured, everything was finally out in the open, and they were finally figuring out how to work together, and then they all die. Yeah, I think maybe my only critique is that it happened too fast. Because it's sort of told in summary over, like, 2 pages. Like, oh yeah, and by the way, all these characters are dead too. So yeah.
To close out, I'll reflect a little bit on the title of the book, which I still don't know if I have a great grasp on exactly what the title's trying to communicate to us. but I think it kind of leads us into this question that is very present in the book, but like the octopus is not the focus, but maybe the center, which is what is there when all we have is like destroyed? And the question of like, what does this octopus know? Like how it's still held as mysterious. And I think that's why it works for us as octopus novel enthusiasts, is the octopus is this creature that we can project ourselves on, but we don't fully know. We don't know what H, the octopus, remembers, if they survived, what happened, but we can speculate and maybe learn something about ourselves by noodling with these nebulous ideas of memory and octopus and what is remembered when so much is taken away.
The only things you have when everything is gone are your memories and your feelings, the connections immediately around you. And I think that's something the octopus in this story embodies very well. No matter what situation they're put in, and again, this is absolutely projecting onto them, which I think, as you've just said, but like they continue to regenerate and they continue to connect and they continue to fight and to feel. It's like such a feeling creature. It's this little flash in the pan and then it's gone and it's just like a big ball of sensation. That being the only thing that we know about it, we can project all of our feelings onto it.
Yeah.
Anything that, if they enjoyed this book or these themes, that they should also read?
I'm interested to read more of Claire Fuller's books that deal with these like ideas of isolation, isolated characters in very different ways. Swimming Lessons, Unsettled Ground, Our Endless Numbered Days, to name a few. I mentioned How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Namagatsu. It's a very different kind of pandemic novel. It's told from multiple different perspectives at different times. They're more like a collection of very tightly wound short stories into a novel. And I don't know, just go listen to like some sad girl music on Spotify. That might get you some vibes.
Absolutely. Make a sad girl playlist. I would recommend, so the feeling of things have dramatically happened to the whole world, very catastrophic things, but we can't see what they are. And we're really just in this very close and personal experience that doesn't give us a ton of answers into how the outside world has changed or why. Really reminded me of this book called I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman that Victoria gave to me. That's about like the last woman on Earth. And she has no idea why. And yeah, fascinating. Another pandemic book, specifically like COVID-19 pandemic book, Lucy by the Sea by Elizabeth Strout. Very different style, very different experience, much more like realistic lit fic. And then the documentary about Octopus that came out during 2020, My Octopus Teacher, on Netflix, I think. If you want to get in the headspace of the human beings who were alive during this time, I would recommend that as well. And last but not least, currently obsessed, what is bringing you joy? We were very, very recently in the same place.
I know.
As of like
so
3
fun.
days ago.
Yes.
Crazy.
I know. One of mine was going to be like, just go drive into the mountains. And I was like, girl, you used to live in Chicago. You know a lot of listeners can't just go drive into the mountains. But if you can,
Yeah.
I highly recommend it. Listening to Dua Lipa's new album, Radical Optimism, a lot. I'm learning a song on my bass. It's really fun. And there is a cafe near me that makes a coconut oolong latte, which, I mean, even if you don't go order it somewhere, you can probably make it, and I think it's delicious, and I highly recommend. And if you get the little toasted coconut bits on top, and then you can kind of like chew on them when you get to the bottom of your tea. That sounds maybe gross. You don't necessarily want to chew your tea, but I enjoy the experience. It's like a little snack. I love a tea latte. I never make them at home. They'd be so doable, but I just never think to make them.
We went to a Jacob Collier concert together.
Oh my gosh.
And wow, what an experience.
It was so good. It was so good.
That man, ridiculous. Redonkulous. And I've also been loving the new Billie Eilish album and Interview with the Vampire Season 2, which I think will come up in our future vampire discussions, because that's all I can think about right now. Yeah, good stuff. So, speaking of vampires, we're gonna get Vampire Book 2 in the next episode, so we will catch you all then.
Until then, happy reading.
Bye!
Bye!
This has been an episode of The Vampire and the Octopus, a special series from Book Club with Julia and Victoria. Thanks for listening, and thank you to our members who keep the show going. You can support the show and also receive access to exclusive bonus content, including our film club, newsletters, and archive of the first 50 episodes of the show at buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, and Julia Clausen. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick. Our logo was designed by Gabby Thubland. We want to know what you're reading and your bookish thoughts, so you can reach us at our website, bookclubwithjv.com, on Instagram at bookclubwithjv, or by leaving a review on Apple or Spotify. We'll catch you next time. Happy reading.